but let's go ahead and get started just for the sake of time. And we'll do a quick roll call with the folks that we've got here tonight.
Yep. We have, I'm just gonna name who's here. So we have Bob Woodruff, Deborah Burkle, Councilor Robin Wheatley, Britta Mansfield, and then staff, we have Clay Downing, who is the planning manager, and Rachel Thomas, city reporter. And we are missing Joy Hughes, Brian Engstrom, and Chuck Watson tonight. So we do not have a quorum. We'll meet to discuss our work plan and no decisions will be made.
Yeah, and I apologize, Britta and I were going to meet a couple times to kind of work on the work plan. And, she with campaign and a baby was tied up. And my life actually has been fun, but very hectic. In beginning of September, I can't remember if I told you or not, but the spirit moved me and I woke up one day and decided to take an early retirement from parks.
There you go.
So 21 years working for parks, and like I said, the spirit moved me and
Congrats.
I was done.
Oh,
In the meantime, my wife has worked as a education assistant at Joanne Austin Elementary for 12 years. This summer, she started her master's degree to get her teaching license. But 2 weeks ago, the 5th grade dual language teacher at Edwards left mid-year. And Leslie applied and she started as a 5th grade teacher 2 weeks ago.
wow.
So 2 years ahead of schedule and in the middle of the year jumped in as a teacher. So all of our routines are totally conflicted. So between all that, yeah, we did. And then last week I had to reset and lost my password.
Mhm.
And so that's all an explanation, not an excuse.
If you ever have issues with lost passwords or anything like that, just email me and I'll get you reset with the team. Same for council.
Oh, yes.
All
All them.
I've got you guys.
So, and Britta, can you see the agenda that's on the screen?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So then if you could maybe scroll down to the packet. And we can refresh ourselves on our 5-year work plan. And, we had basically 2 primary goals. One was preserving historic structures, which is what Britta and I were going to meet and talk about. And the other was preserving human histories. And, inside of, if you scroll to the next one, inside of historic structures, we had a couple of bullet points, updating the historic inventory, collaborating with local organizations for building restorations, that'll tie in. I'm curious to hear the report from the meeting that you all went to and play some of the grant opportunities you were talking about in the memo. Exploring a historic downtown designation. It sounds like that's something this committee is interested in, the city is interested in. It's just going through the process of, exploring, is that the right fit for Newburgh? My personal favorite, developing an awards program. And then we've talked about pass-through grants with the caveat being, some of the challenge of a pass-through grant in the administrative side and monitoring. So wanting to be aware that that's done in a way that doesn't put an undue burden on staff.
Yeah, can you explain the last 2? So what's an awards program? I'm not aware of that one.
An awards program can take many forms, but basically it's a way to recognize property owners for maintaining, restoring historic properties.
No, I think that was done in the past because remember at one of our, it came to council, it was a short-term rental, the house next to the library.
Yeah.
She mentioned that she won an award.
For the restoration of the property.
Something like that, like
Mhm.
20 years ago, but what happened to that? So,
So that could have been through the city or could have been one of the various historical
Yeah.
societies that have existed. There's
Yeah.
been 3 different in Newburgh over
Yeah.
the years.
so is that what you're referring to?
Something along those lines. Yeah, that one I vaguely remember. So I moved to Newburgh in 2006. And I vaguely remember it was just a piece of paper printed out, like off of a printer that a couple houses had.
Oh,
I lived in
Historic
that
site,
neighborhood when I first moved here, and I remember, it might even be this house had, and I can't remember who awarded.
I believe that was the Historical Society at that time. which has
Okay.
since, that one sunsetted and a new one
Okay.
started in 2011. So,
Okay.
And, you know, one of the things we learned talking with, the SHPO was that we can't get a grant to, have signs made for historic buildings. But we can use money for an award to be created. And that award could be sign shaped that somebody
Oh.
could put on. So it's a little bit circuitous, but there's a way that we could have like a little plaque that gets put onto a historic building, recognizing, you know, so I lived in Charleston, South Carolina for 8 years, a real hotspot for historic preservation. They have a very robust awards program. And so there's different categories for renovation,
Yeah.
preservation. And, you know, I think that's a good kind of entry level way for folks to, you know, get an incentive for just
Yeah.
preserving history
Yeah.
rather than tearing it down or, you know,
Yeah.
putting on vinyl siding when it,
Ooh.
you know, is cheaper and easier, but not historically accurate to that whole
I
building.
agree.
and it could be, should be shingles or something like
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Or a shiplap
Mhm,
siding
yeah.
or something, yeah. And so, yeah, that's one.
Yeah, what's the pass-through grant?
And then the pass-through grant, that's just, you know, some grants are not administered by, they're not given by the granting body. They give it to a city, a county to then give out to property owners.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
not the city or the county's money, it's a
Oh,
pass-through.
we
from somebody.
manage it.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
kind of like what we did with the ARPA grants.
Okay, we
So
got the money
others
and we
came to
decided,
us,
okay,
yeah.
right.
And
Okay.
then we actually do something similar with our CDBG grants too, which is another kind of big one.
What is that?
Community development block grants. They're usually for housing.
Okay. Good to know, thank you.
And, you know, we've talked about it, we always want to be mindful of those. Since, even though it's not our money, since we're the grant, if we did something like that, since we're the grant administrator,
Mhm.
we're responsible for all of the monitoring and
Right.
bookkeeping.
Yes, we know,
Which
yeah.
can be a nightmare, yeah.
And so, you know,
Okay.
there can be some grants that look appealing, but when we really look at the staff burden, it's not
Mhm.
something that's realistic to do, even though it would be fun to do.
Mm,
So
Okay.
something like an awards program where it's, you've already done the work and now we're just recognizing you.
Yeah,
Or,
that's true.
something that Clay has in his memo, which is the idea of having, basically we hire someone to do something like architectural services and the people can apply and just use that service
Mm.
and we're paying for the service, not the people. That's a lot easier to administer.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
But, and
very good.
we'll talk more about it when you
Yeah.
kind of talk about that, but that one really appealed to me because one, you know, as a property owner, it can be, if you're not already tapped into kind of the historic preservation world, it can be intimidating to find an architect. And once you have a picture, funding and, you know, moving forward with your bank or whatever is so much easier once you have a drawing.
the next step.
Well, and you all are welcome to talk about the stuff that I put in the memo. And I don't have to give an excessive update. The reason I did the memo ahead of time is
So
so
you
you
didn't have
could
to.
have that if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, not so I didn't have to, but
Yeah, no,
so that you all
I
have
hear-
it for thinking about in terms of your work plan too. So
Yeah.
if any of that kind of resonated with you, then
Yeah,
You have
that
to-
one in particular did for me, because I think that would be something that just would be really appealing to a lot of property owners.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's reflected in the plan or not, but I'm gonna bring up again the communications part of this
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
I feel like
There we go.
people don't know if they're in a historic property. Like, some are obvious, right? But some of them are not. And what does it mean to be in a level 1 versus a level 2 or what, those kinds of things. And what can you do and what can't you do? And, you know, I feel like we have a huge opportunity to not only talk about the kind of the bureaucratic process, but also, hey, here's a link to the history of this particular address and why it fits in with our historical designation and why it's important. Not everybody will read it, but I think it's good to put out there. So I hope that you'll consider that.
No, I agree 100%. You know, I think it's, I think I've said this kind of different ways, but I really feel like this committee is going, whether we want to or not, and that we want to, we're going to be more prominent in the next few years as, you know, more development pressure is on the city. And, you know, folks want to maintain the livability, the small town feel, all of that is historic preservation. And so, you know, we can help, you know, flesh out that conversation. What does livability really look like?
Mm.
What is keeping Newburgh, the small town feel in Newburgh really look like? While we grow and develop and provide affordable housing and jobs for folks.
On that note, just describing what is Newburgh and what is our feel, what is our look, that's something that's challenging to do.
Yeah.
But could be very valuable to kind of summarize what here is the main characteristics we see in this town. Here are some major architectural styles that are featured in our downtown. Those types of analysis are really important
Yeah,
and they're not in existence yet.
I'd love to work on that.
Okay.
I used to live in Colorado Springs and there were distinct neighborhoods,
Mhm.
you know, the north part of downtown had all these wonderful Victorian houses and, you know, for that part of Colorado, it was old, not compared to Charleston,
Yeah,
right? But you couldn't tear something down and put in a modern house.
No,
So I think we have some opportunities to discuss whether or not that's an approach we could use.
Mhm.
I like what you brought up.
that idea
Yeah.
of figuring out what our styles are.
Right.
Um. So Bob, if I
Yeah.
might suggest, I know that Clay's updates, I think would help with this conversation on the work plan, and then I have an update on the grant programs. Clay sent me today, actually.
okay,
Would love to share those. Okay. So the update on the grant program is we are eligible to apply this year, but it would be right now. And I don't feel that we are ready this year to probably apply for a grant. I think that, my recommendation would be to apply next year and spend this next year prepping our project, getting everything on board and apply for our first grant for next year. However, this year they have up to $16,000 available. Did you catch the deadline for stuff?
No, I can pull it up.
That'd be great, thank you. When I've got the meeting going, it's hard to
Yeah.
pull
is
things.
that,
up.
is that the?
That's the certified local government
grant?
grant, so that's in
Okay.
every 2 years, every other year, we're eligible to apply again. So this year they have up to $16,000 available. If we can get our act together and apply really quickly, maybe, but you've got to keep in mind that,
That's a lot to.
yes, that's a
yeah,
lot to ask, and your staff is very, 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 very busy right now.
No,
So we're not saying no, but.
no, I
yeah.
agree that that's,
Yeah.
we're not at a point where we've got something productive that we just need to polish up. We have to really,
when's
Grant
the-
application deadline is February 28th.
Okay, that's actually not
That's
too
a
bad.
little more time than I
Okay.
thought.
That's,
too.
so
That's
we've
about a
got,
month.
2.5 months to get
February,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 20.
February 28th.
Okay, okay, I
And-
was thinking it was January.
My suggestion that understanding that deadline, if there was something that we thought was worth it, just keep it simple.
Yeah,
Mhm.
For example, one of the things in the primaries based on structures is exploring that historic district designation.
Mhm.
That's the grant we gave back.
Yep.
So we've already written that, and we could essentially recycle it forward, and we could change it
Clarify.
so that it's something that folks are more comfortable with, because if the problem, which
Exactly.
we talked about before the meeting opened, we were talking about that grant. If it came across as a foregone conclusion that that's the path we're going in, as opposed to an exploratory project
Mhm.
to help people understand and then make a decision as a community.
Then we know exactly how to change it in
Mhm.
order to fit our needs.
Yeah, so that would be another one that you guys have mentioned. is
So
historic
it's
resources.
definitely not off the table to do it this year, but we need to consider that we've got a grant that we know we'll have every other year. I don't know if you remember when Curry came and visited us, she said that a lot of cities will create a 6-year plan and say, okay, we're gonna apply for this grant. And over this year, we're going to do that grant, then we're gonna do this work
Mhm.
related to it, and then the next year we'll do another grant for this subject.
Right.
I think creating a plan like that, basing our work around 3 grants over 6 years or something like that would probably be very beneficial use of
Yeah.
our time.
So if you scroll down, we have that 6-year outline,
Which is start.
and I wanna say it was like year
Yeah.
3 or 4 was pursue the historic downtown designation.
Yes.
Um,
So
Like-
we discussed redoing the historic inventory first. Before redoing the historic downtown designation, partially because our current historic inventory is 30, 40 years old. It's pretty old now.
Could use it.
It could use an update of several of the buildings in it aren't standing anymore. You know, there are others that probably should have been included, and never were. So that's why I originally suggested this as a proposed project.
I want to throw out, I think this 6-year cycle is great to be moving towards, but I also want to make sure that we have a really firm idea of what our goals are before moving into like what the 6-year cycle is. So like, what are our goals and what projects do we want to do? And then how can the grants support those projects? I mean, there's lots of different thoughts on how you can go for grants, but I want to make sure we're doing like what the Newburgh community needs before just like kind of having our goals be dictated by what grants are available. And that's not necessarily where we're going, but I just want to throw that out as like, let's be aware of that and make sure we're not putting the cart before the horse. I think this is probably what we'll end up doing, but let's make sure we understand why we're doing it and like what firming up our goals and fleshing those out of what that looks like, which I think we have in the next steps, but
Yeah, 100%.
No, that's a good point, because that was the concern, a year ago, was that
Mhm.
we were just following the grant foregone conclusion rather than. So I'm curious what folks' thoughts are, I'm intrigued by the idea of taking that grant, freshening it up, clarifying that it's exploratory. If we were to get that, my understanding is it would be used for a consultant to come in and do surveys, outreach, communication. It feels like it could be a really good kickoff to starting this conversation in town about historic preservation and what are our historic preservation goals.
Bob, is it to answer the question, what does a historic district look like? Is that what we're trying to engage the public with, that question, or what?
My understanding, my remembrance of what the grant was basically to have somebody come in and do some surveys to see if there's interest in town of creating, moving towards a historic.
But if people
Designation.
don't know what a historic district looks like.
Yeah, and I don't know the details of the grant to know how much education there was in there along with the polling and.
Well, there is some concern that people may not want to join because they would have, they couldn't do what they wanted with their property, so
Yeah.
there's some pros and cons, so.
And that's where, I mean, we need to somehow, whether it's through, a grant and a consultant or internally. We need to kick off that conversation to find out how much of an appetite there is in town for it. Yeah, of course, there's always gonna be that push and pull, like there's some benefits, but there's some drawbacks. And, none of us could say at this point, like, is there really a strong appetite in Newburgh? Or is there a strong opposition in Newburgh to a historic designation? I don't know that answer. Nobody's done enough work to say what the mood is.
So this would decide what the mood is,
Mhm.
the consultant
It would
would
give
help
us-
determine it.
And this is just a thought, my hope is that this could give us some insight
Yeah.
and kick off a conversation.
Rachel, you said is it 16,000 that's available this grant cycle? Is
Yeah,
that-
this year they said up to 16, it'll be between 11 and 16,000. So
Okay.
they said if you need 16,000 to complete your work, please apply for the full amount. But you may not get it. That's what the email
Is
said.
that enough to bring in a consultant to do this kind of survey and outreach work?
The last time that this was done, it was under a $10,000 contract.
Okay,
And that was with a $5,000 put in from the city and 5,000 from the grant, which was CLG.
Okay, great.
But wasn't there an issue with getting someone to do, like the grant was there, but we couldn't find a consultant?
We flew it once and we couldn't find a consultant,
Yeah.
so we flew it again and we got a consultant
Yeah.
that was appropriate.
Okay.
And we thought that person, once we reviewed it, looked fine, but then
Okay.
basically about the time we were ready to sign
Yeah,
and begin work, that was when we went ahead and pulled it.
yeah, okay, so we should be able to find someone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So one consideration on that is that some of those things, getting the temperature of the community and doing education, don't necessarily need to do through a consultant. That can be a series of town halls, that can be things like that. Now, that's something as consultant could do for us if we wanted them to.
Yeah.
Um,
And keeping in mind that the primary staff that are helping with this committee
mhm.
have full-time jobs already. So
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
that's the
Yes.
point of bringing in the consultant and the why, it's the bandwidth you have on the staff. So not that we
Exactly.
couldn't do it and not that we wouldn't like to do it.
But
It's
there,
that with
yeah,
competing obligations, it's challenging.
so
And you might-
consider both of those pros and cons of doing
And
this.
you might not have the details of the previous grant proposal. Do you have a sense for how much of what we asked for last time was for education and how much was for polling, you know, but my.
I can tell you some of it. It's
Yeah.
not in front of me in a spreadsheet, but I'm actually looking at the proposal right
Sure,
now.
sure, yeah.
The, which would be way easier if I could break it out by line item
Yeah.
percentages, but
I hear
for
you.
example, public education. So I'm seeing they labeled several of these things being public education. It looks like it's a pretty, frankly, it's a pretty substantial portion of this is for public education, and I'm just glancing at it without. I don't know who puts this together, not the spreadsheet, but it looks like more than 50% of it's education based. Because it looks like 1,000 there, another 1,200 there, and so I'm looking at things like printing of brochures, Q&A, survey sheets, kind of materials costs, consultant time for facilitating workshops. Volunteer education with this commission being part of it. So one of the things that I could do, if we think this is appropriate, is I can take this, I can send the initial proposal around, and that could happen like tomorrow.
Mhm.
If we feel it needs to be further analyzed, I could break it up into something that's more of a tracker that you would typically see in a project management tracker or something that kind of helps guide you into your invoicing.
Mhm.
So I could do that if we think that has value. If it's just speculative and not that valuable, I don't have a burning desire to do it.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's a problem for us sharing this. I mean, we already submitted it to city. If someone gave us a public records request, we'd give it to
Yeah.
them. So,
Oh, yeah, 100% shared out.
so if that's of interest, I think that's fine.
Rita, any thoughts on this?
I think it's great that we already have an application written for it, basically like to spruce it up and send it out. I think that like that's the low hanging fruit that makes sense to go for. My question, and this, not to throw a wrench, but really just like look at all options. Would it be helpful to pursue updating the historic resources inventory before doing the exploration work for becoming getting the designation? Because that could give some hard data as to here are the historic resources. This is why we'd be creating a historic district. Would that be helpful to do beforehand? Those are the steps that my brain goes through, but not everybody thinks like me. So what would be most beneficial to the community and most beneficial to actually achieving that designation if that's what we want?
I think that's a good point,
Mhm.
Britta.
Mhm. Yeah,
I don't, do you guys feel like it's a precursor for?
Well, to throw a counter on there.
Uh-huh.
So if we evaluated so I think there's a good point to that, and there's a lot of value in what Britta's saying. The other way I could see it working from a workflow perspective is if we explore a historic district first. And then once it's decided whether or not that's wanted to be pursued, then that could be something that's part of the historic inventory project.
Okay.
So one is kind of the exploration and the other one could execute perhaps the district and the inventory at the same time.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if that's.
So what you're
That's
saying
how
is
I
the
picture it.
district wouldn't necessarily be executed by this first grant. The first grant would be exploring the whole idea, preparing some information, doing some preliminary survey research.
Mhm.
And then when we do the historic inventory update 2 years later, that would actually start working on the actual applications to create a historic district and those types
Yeah,
of
if we
things,
wanted
yeah.
to lump it in at that
Yeah.
time as part of the historic resource inventory update.
Mhm.
And so Britta, I don't know if, what your thoughts on that, since you had posed it to go in one sequence, but the proposal that I'm looking at, the brief description for what we have written was City of Newburgh will conduct public outreach and education program for property owners about historic preservation and assess potential for creating a historic downtown district. So it wasn't for the creating, it was actually really just
Exploring. the
just
idea.
talking to people and getting them updated. But I think that you do make a good point, and I think that the sequencing is important.
Yeah, I think either, I think you can make an argument for either. I think personal opinion, I feel like the historic resource inventory is something that needs to be updated. Like we've identified that already. I think we're pretty clear that needs to happen. So I feel like that's something we'd also bring a consultant in to do.
Yep.
But again, like the low hanging fruit, who has time to write that grant, you know? So I don't know. I could go either way. And I mean,
So from the
if we
town-
could update the application to somehow include like maybe we tweak it just enough that we could get some of that work done to contribute to an update of the inventory as some of the outreach and education. I think that could be interesting to see if we could update it that way.
One of the things from a level of effort, I'd be curious if you have what you think. But writing a grant application for an update of historic resources inventory, that doesn't actually sound like a particularly hard grant to
No.
write
I don't think
or
so.
administer, because it's just gonna be monthly billing statements from your consultant and providing them with some of the resources that, in theory, we know where they are.
Yeah, so we get a quote from a few places, so we have an idea of how much it's gonna cost, and then we say, here's the grant, so it's a pretty straightforward one.
Managing education and outreach, that can be time consuming even when you have a consultant, because there's a lot of touch points. Creating an inventory, you kind of make the technical experts do it.
Yeah, so that's not totally out of the question either. We just need to make a decision very rapidly. Now, here's the other thing is if council has not approved this work plan yet,
Mhm.
we would have to get it at one of the January meetings that we're going to go after this grant probably, or at least the basic work plan, so we could say, here's the basic goals. So we'd have to turn the work plan around fast enough for council to say, yes, go. And then we could apply for this grant. So that's my other concern. I'm trying to think, how
Well,
much approval do you think we need to see?
Not, I don't think there's a high level of approval needed.
It's not
If-
a high expense.
For
level.
example, if, Councilor Wheatley, if you wanted to like, basically bring a memo and ask for general support and saying, the Historic Preservation Commission is still developing their work plan. One of the early items we've identified is this, there's a time-sensitive grant. We'd like to know if even though the work plan isn't completed, if the rest of the council is supportive of them moving forward with this grant application to do X work. So if that's something that you'd be willing to kind of pull that forward,
Okay.
then I don't think it needs to be, we don't have to feel excessively rushed on the work plan if there's consensus, but
Okay, then that's
Okay.
great.
that-
point. Yeah, that's a great idea. Keep in mind that likely our council representative for this committee is going to be changing in January, just so you guys know. So it'll probably
I
be,
may try
you
to,
might try and get it back.
I may try
Have
actually.
that
yeah.
conversation. So we don't, it may, but they're deciding those appointments on January sixth, so some things might shift. But
Okay.
we'd love to keep you informed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
since I've been, yeah,
you've been in these discussions, yeah.
Does it feel realistic to get whatever necessary green lights you need and write a grant proposal by February 28th to update the historic inventory?
Tell you what your workload like. I feel like if you and I worked on it together, we could probably get it done. by
yeah, I
then.
think we could get it done.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think that there's a planning network across the state. And I could ask people to share recent proposals. they've-
Similar.
Mhm.
Yeah. That sounds good.
And frankly, we could ask CLG if they're willing to share past grants that have requested X type of
Mhm.
proposal.
Yeah.
And see if they would be willing to give us those.
Yeah.
Say, we'd like to get a look at what's been successful in the past.
Why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
And since there's subject to public records too. you
Yep.
can get that.
It, yeah, it's very enticing. I like the idea of, our existing grant proposal. I love the idea of having some consultant to help us really kick off the conversation, but I think Britta makes a really valid point. So just thinking through timeline, okay, so if it's realistic to put together a grant for updating our inventory by February 28th, we get it, then 2 years from now, because it's a two-year cycle, so 2 years from now, we would go for a grant for the communication portion. So that would give us 2 years to update our inventory, do our own internal communication, round networking, before going out for that grant again.
Okay, so it's what I'm hearing is we're talking about updating the inventory first,
Mhm.
then going for the historic downtown designation. So we're kind of, let me see if that's pretty much.
I
what-
think
Let's see.
yeah, we're-
Yep, that's pretty much the cycle I had written out
we
here.
just
So,
did,
hey,
we
that
just
was
did
good.
year one right
Yeah,
now.
hey, planning and preparation, yeah. That's great. So, and then a grant to begin a historic restoration award program, or like we were saying, hiring an architect to create facade
Yeah.
drawings or something like that, which would give us the time over the next few years to decide exactly what that program would look like.
Yeah.
So a restoration program, just say, cut the word awards out and figure out what that would look like.
Well, I think
So-
that could even be subject to change if we end up doing where was it, the year for the grant to pursue historic downtown designation. If that includes communications and outreach, and we see that there either is interest or there isn't, I think that would redesignate when we want to look at an awards program, because that could be something that we pursue instead of downtown designation if there's not interest. So those things are, I think, subject to flip in the future.
And certainly the way I'm picturing it is that grant to pursue historic downtown designation, that's the communication and education. That's not a grant to enact.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So grant
Yeah.
to consider.
A grant to consider, again, because of the last go around with that grant, we want to make sure we're clear throughout the city hall that we're exploring the idea, we're trying to gauge interest, not enacting.
So here's something to consider too, is that if we do, because getting that historic designation can be quite the process through SHPO at times, and it does include a lengthy application that it takes a bit of work.
Mhm.
That'd be great to hire a consultant for, because I have never written one. I've read many, but I have not written one myself. So if we think about it this way, if we're redoing the historic inventory, the idea here was to take what we learned from the historic inventory and apply it in year 3. That could be more of a start exploring this idea and gauging interest, and then hire the consultant with the grant, if that's right, or pursue another thing. So we could spend year 3 gauging interest on downtown designation based on what we've gained too. So we can do some of that.
Internally starting that conversation.
So what I could see is it would be fairly simple to do a larger push to invite public to come comment on that at one of our meetings here. And it would be very simple for us to put out just SurveyMonkey surveys in the community. And then I would encourage the members of the commission to actually go out and speak with people in the downtown, go
Yeah.
door to door and shop, speak to people.
Mhm.
But so that would be fairly simple to do. It's a bit of work, but it's not too difficult with our staffing levels. So that could be something we consider even without a grant
Yeah.
for that year, once we have the inventory done.
No, that's kind of what I was, similar to what I was picturing in my head.
So based on what Britta said earlier about thinking about our end goal, right? So it's sounding like the end goal is we'd like to have a good grasp on our historic character. And then we would like to have some sort of program to incentivize property owners in our city to do the restoration work and to preserve their historical character of their facilities.
Yes.
That's our end, like this is what it looks like in 6 years. We have some sort of project in place to incentivize this. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, I mean, basically,
Yep.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, that's spot on. That's what I would love to see. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to capture.
Yeah, that within a couple of years, but and certainly by 6 years, that historic preservation is more of a top level conversation that we're having in town.
Okay.
That,
Yeah.
I think right now, a lot of people will say they want to keep the small town feel. You know, I hear them saying, to me, they're saying, I want to preserve our history. And in 6 years, folks will have more concrete, more specific details, what they mean when they say, I want to keep the small town feel. There's always gonna be that vague, hard to define, essence of what a small town is. But it'll be more of a conversation about what does a small town look like?
Wasn't there some work done after the visioning program that the city did, where we had various committees? And that visioning program I mean, they solicited, like, there was a survey or something, and they solicited what people thought about it. And yes, what does a small town look like to you? I think
We could,
there's
we
I
could
think-
find some of
information.
those, though, that's
Yeah, I
before
know
both
where
of
the
our
Newburgh,
times.
well, I was involved with those
Oh, were you?
members.
Okay, cool.
It's a nice thing about living here before I started.
I just
working
don't know
here.
where the results from the city side,
We have the Newburgh Community Visioning document, so we've got
just the
a
document.
big document, which has a lot of information about
Yeah.
what people valued about our city.
Yeah.
So we can definitely pull that out. I'd say the survey results themselves are gone, just the summaries now based on retention, but we have the full document.
I'd be happy to go through that
Okay.
and pull the salient points for you that relate to the historical preservation.
I will, we do have the meeting notes from all of those too, the minutes, which I actually, I may have just put them on our web drawer so you could access them anytime.
I think that had some pretty clear goals for, I don't know if it was arts and culture, or there was a whole, one of the groups, I was the facilitator for that group that was
Yep,
heritage and arts and culture, and there were like really specific goals as that were the product of that visioning process. So there's definitely good information there that would relate to what we're doing.
so off the top of my head, because I remember the Historical Society, which I was involved with at that time, took some of those goals and ran with them, so we actually worked on some of them. And part of that was the mapping project that I led at the college after that, where we mapped out the history of the downtown. But one of them was capturing the architectural styles and like look of Newburgh. That was one of the things that
Yeah.
came up out of that. There wasn't a consensus about what that was. So there's work that needs to be done on the history of the buildings to kind of understand what is Newburgh? What is that look? What is the Newburgh style? We're not an old west town where it's okay, false front buildings, everyone.
Right.
We're somewhere in there. We're more Art Deco probably, actually.
Yeah.
So, that I think would be a major goal, is understanding our architectural aesthetic. There we go.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, do you know in what 50-year, 20-year period most of the building happened in
Mhm.
Newburgh?
So the majority of the building, you have your first couple of buildings crop up. I mean, 1885 is chapters. And then after that, it's 1891, you've got a couple more. And then it really hits and 1900 to 1930 is when you really have the majority of your building. Yeah, and if you look at the main downtown strip right now, if you stood there in 1930, it looks very similar. It's almost the same buildings. A lot of them though have had false fronts put on them, or the fronts of buildings have been changed over the years. So that's a really neat thing about a
Mhm.
facade restoration. We
Yeah.
can go back to that Art Deco look throughout our whole downtown, which would be kind of cool,
That would be
right?
very cool,
Which
yeah.
if
is
you-
happening
And if you
already.
look at some of those Diamond in the Rough grants that we've had at chapters
Yep.
and at the Hop Insurance, or not Hop Insurance, State, one of the insurance companies next to
Farm.
Second
State
Street.
Farm.
Where the Second Street
Yeah,
Church is.
Yep.
what they
That
had
was-
there, they had it basically a
Beautiful.
cladding across the top that had a
Yeah.
really, I don't know what they were going for, but when they removed it, it really exposed some of the architectural features and the masonry. And it looks very nice. And same
You
with
can
chapters.
open the light,
Yeah.
the windows on the transom windows can be opened back up and be It's beautiful when you do this. So I think the end goals I'm hearing now are understanding the aesthetic of the downtown and then what's our architectural style. Having a way to incentivize preservation, make it a conversation that is actively happening, that people are thinking about historic preservation when they think about our downtown. And then have data about our historical resources at our fingertips, ready to go. That sounds like a beautiful plan for 6 years out. Now, this does not include right now a lot of the it does include some education about these pieces. So I think that would be kind of a subcategory of our main goals. It doesn't include talking about a museum at this point, which I think it was probably a lofty goal, but cool if we can get there.
I keep thinking, keep trying to think of where, and I can never.
I know.
walked by the Scout House and I was like, no, it's a little too small.
Scout House,
no
and they use
storage."
it.
Yeah,
But you don't need a huge location either.
yeah, no, you don't.
No. It's an interesting, you have to have someone who's very good at running one. We don't know anyone. I mean, that's not a totally off the table discussion, but I just think it's not captured in any of these goals that we brought up so far. So that may be a beyond 6-year goal.
I think one of the big picture goals that we're talking about is we want not just historic preservation, but we want our community's history to be preserved and accessible and understood by the people here. Like, and we've decided to do that via the things that we just outlined. I think a museum could fit under that larger goal, but also the reality of bringing one to fruition in 5 years, I would say is very slim. I'm in, hopefully, fingers crossed, going to be opening a cultural center in 2025 through work, and it's been way more than a 5-year process to do that. So I think it's a great goal. Would love to be a part of making that happen, but like I think that could be a super sub goal of moving towards like exploring the feasibility of a museum, but it's not. I mean, the reality of it happening within 5 years is slim.
Going back to the Diamond in the Rough grant, what is the grant cycle for that?
They have those every single year.
Okay,
We would work through the Downtown Coalition for those grants. So
Yeah.
the two of us would kind of collaborate on those because it's an Oregon Main Street grant.
Mhm.
And it's the property owner applying through them. So we would support their application, basically.
is there a pipeline of, do we have any identified kind of potentials for that Diamond in the Rough grant?
I don't,
We have had them in the past, but I don't think there is one,
Okay.
there's not a current list. I know the Downtown Coalition does not have a current list. I mean, off the top of my head, I could probably name 5 places for you, just knowing our town, but there's that, so chapters, restoration,
Yeah.
Diamond in the Rough. The,
What I'm thinking, if we could identify and work with a property owner and within this 6-year
Mhm.
timeframe, if somebody did a Diamond in the Rough and did a restoration, that's a great way to get that work done,
Mhm.
but also put a spotlight on this whole process and historic preservation. Hey, this is going on, like all this is going on behind the scenes that let, chapters look the way it does now compared to how it did.
I think 100% that we could support that throughout because it wouldn't be as much administrative load
Yeah.
on us to make that happen. I think we should reach out to the Downtown Coalition about this and see if we can encourage them to encourage people. I think that you all having conversations with property owners downtown would be a great way to keep that momentum moving there. So it would naturally fit in
Yeah,
easily, but whenever it does occur, we can definitely highlight it. So we already know that we've had chapters, and we also got an Oregon Historic Movies Theaters grant. Britta wrote for the cameo, so all the restorations that have been happening there was a grant funded project too. So letting people know that this is happening and actually helping people and getting those testimonials of how it worked,
Mhm.
I think might help encourage other people.
Yeah.
Rachel, can you go for it?
Go for.
Oh,
What?
shoot, what was I gonna ask? The Diamond in the Rough, does that have to go through NDC or could that be something that funnels through another nonprofit?
It has to go through NDC.
Okay.
It's a street grant, so.
Okay,
yep.
cool.
Speaking of grant funding, is there any prohibition to do fundraising or finding grants from private companies or entities?
No,
fine.
No? Okay.
I would say that it can be hard for private companies if it's going to, like, if we're talking about the restoration of somebody's property,
Mhm.
most of the time,
Yeah,
private
absolutely.
entities don't.
Yeah,
Do
so I'm
subsidize
thinking
them.
more of a,
If we keep in mind that
But it's
the
historic building.
Austin Foundation has a grant available for historic preservation, which they have told me many, many times they would love to see used, it has not been touched. That is something that's available in our community, and they want to see historic work done with it. So there are private grants in our area that are very much
Mhm.
devoted to Newburgh. So,
I have a friend who has done some grant work, and has done that pretty successfully. And she's retired and she might be happy to volunteer if that's something that you guys.
eventually,
She'll love that I just volunteered.
yeah.
Oops.
Do you know off the top of your head, what's the deadline for the Diamond in the Rough grant, or is it a rolling?
It's, I believe.
Late January.
Mhm.
Oh, it opens late
It opens.
January.
Okay.
They do those every year.
So it opens late January, does it say, you know, when it closes?
It doesn't have closure, so I think
Okay.
that one of the links in the memo that I sent over
Oh.
should have a link to some of those grant programs that I was mentioning, and I only mentioned a couple, and so like
There's so many.
the movie
Yeah.
theater grant that was just mentioned, or the Oregon Historic Theaters grant
Mhm.
was mentioned, that's on that same webpage, I believe.
Okay,
So there's a lot in that.
I'll
Just in
explore
that
that
webpage.
more. I'll get a hold of Brandon Anderson and the NDC and say, hey, this Diamond in the Rough grant is out there for property owners. Let's talk about who might be good to
Yeah.
encourage to apply for that. And
Another thing that comes from these grants is they have an awards program every year, related to this. And it doesn't even have to be a grant program, but if we know someone in our city who's done great work on infill or sorry, historic preservation or something like that, we should be nominating someone every year for these grants. And having been the person that administered that program 2.5 years ago, there were almost no applicants. So we should definitely be putting people up for these awards. It's not a monetary award, but it really looks good when Newburgh starts winning awards.
well, I would say we've got a slam dunk with, I can't remember his name, but the fellow who moved the house.
Yeah, we were thinking about that.
That's a great list, yeah.
Yeah,
He did that, when I think of an awards program, that's the kind of thing that
Yeah.
I'd love to see recognized.
So when Oregon Heritage puts out notifications that it's time to nominate people for these awards, we should be putting awards up because we have some great projects happening in our town. I was really surprised to see that none of the big projects happening in Newburgh were nominated when I was working for the state. So I would highly recommend that
Yeah.
we do that, because that's a way to bring the visibility and the conversation to preservation, which is one of our main goals.
And I can look it up. Do you know, like, when that opens up for
It
nominations?
It was in the summer,
Okay,
so probably May, June, and then I think they decided by the end of the summer.
because yeah, that project, I'd love to nominate that one.
Yeah, that would be a fantastic.
and I don't know, all the projects that have been happening. I mean, I think that's part of my issue is I feel like I'm
Mhm.
fumbling around to find out, okay, well, what projects
Mhm.
exist where they did some renovation and, I don't
And
know.
some of those, so the ones that need a decision for an approval for
Uh-huh.
exterior, you all will hear about because we'll let you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's only quarterly, so that doesn't necessarily give you so that increment of time can be a
Right.
little long.
Right.
But, but there can be others. So First Bank of Newburgh, there's an individual who's doing a lot of mostly interior renovations and I think then just some paint on the outside. But, maybe there's other aspirations because parts of that structure are newer than others.
Mhm.
So maybe there's other things that new property owner is thinking about. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But I think it looks much sharper than it did just a year or two
They
ago.
did some work along the cornice, on the
Mhm.
corner there.
Seems like, yeah.
Looks
Yeah.
much, much better than it did. In my opinion.
Well, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, the guy he came to us asking about moving the house and
Doug
Mhm.
Peterson.
Doug Peterson,
Mhm.
because doesn't he's also doing First Street Pub? Does he? own that as
That's a
well?
rumor I heard, although I don't know where I heard it, but I
Okay.
think so.
Okay.
I read that in Newsburg this week, so.
Oh,
that-
Yeah.
There you go. That's probably where I heard it.
The official
Yes.
rumor mill.
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
yes, he has a lot of this. Yeah, he's great.
One thing we could think about, just to make that more visible, is putting an agenda item. Just a standing one, any updates on historic preservation work that we've seen happen.
Yeah.
Where anyone here can share things they've seen,
Mhm.
but that'll remind us to discuss.
As an
I'll just put that as an
And we
ongoing
could
item.
just ask the, publish in Newsburg too, that, hey, if you have a historic project that you're thinking about doing or whatever, you bring it to our attention and, as you said,
Yeah.
if they have to ask us, obviously we'll know about it, but
Yeah.
and that's the other thing is, does everybody know that they're supposed to ask?
No, not everybody does,
Okay.
although in theory. So most historic landmark designations are opt-in. But once they're initially designated, if it passes from one owner and then to another owner, or maybe it goes through the family and that one family member was really into this, but they were just weird and quirky.
Uh-huh.
And then it goes to this next,
Yeah.
generation, maybe they have no idea that was part of it.
Mhm.
So I don't know how those,
Oh.
the timeline of those structures really goes.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the commercial buildings, the tenants and lessees that are there are often not the same person. And some of those commercial buildings, those property owners could be anywhere. Some of them are in town, but, a number of them aren't.
I think we've had a fairly productive
Yeah,
conversation
It's
here.
exciting.
Yeah.
Probably the most exciting meeting I've,
Yeah, it's fun to
Yeah,
see the
yeah.
actual goals. So
Yeah.
I think we've got our broad goals. I think what we're coming down to is that this is fairly pretty much what we want to do. Sorry, my words are struggling there. So this 6-year cycle is fairly close to what we
Yeah.
want, but it probably needs a couple changes. So what would we recommend to that? So if I'm gonna start writing this up for you guys, what would we want to change? We kind of are doing year one right now, but.
Well, do you want to add in with the clarification of defining a historic character as a goal or a sub goal?
Yeah, and I've written that in as a goal. Yeah,
And am I hearing that we want to move that grant to redo the historic inventory up to year one, basically?
I'm kind of thinking we're shifting everything,
Okay,
just getting rid of year one now.
Yeah.
And going with, and just moving everything down, which
Exactly.
might mean that the new year 6
Mhm.
is with. Evaluating and continuing whatever our historic restoration program is.
Mhm.
We'll take the word awards out,
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what that program will look like right now, if it'll be an award, if it will be No,
Yeah.
I love this architect idea, I think that's really cool,
Well, and
something similar.
yeah, and I'm curious if we can do that under any of these other grants that are available as a community resource when we get into what is currently listed as year 3.
Yep.
Where it says complete historic resource inventory, identify buildings in need. So something like that would help property owners to address buildings.
Exactly, it would.
In that regard, does the city have any ordinances around maintaining historic properties in a good condition? Like I've seen some houses that are clearly historic that are almost condemnable. And I'm just wondering what ordinances support keeping up property and making sure that landlords do what they're supposed to do.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And some of that would be the hardship argument. How do you prove that someone is not just lax, but willfully
Mhm.
doing this, that they're not in a hardship situation? Because most people don't, in theory, don't let property just go to seed, especially if it has value for it to be maintained. So there's, and it really is a shame, and I think that's where grants and things like that offer resources. There has to be an assumption that there's some goodwill behind that from the property owner, that that's what they want. Now, do some people take advantage of those grants and then potentially just sell the
Yeah.
property afterwards? They could.
Yeah.
But
And I think there are ways around that. There was a
Mhm.
huge brouhaha in Colorado Springs with a property owner who was known as a slumlord.
Yeah.
For exactly that
Mhm.
reason. So, I would like to also think that, we would create a mechanism to assess whether it's a hardship if we go down that road.
well, one of the things, so
There
I
is
should
study
say,
around
from
hardship.
planning, there are ways that we do that around historic resources. From a nuisance, hygiene and safety,
Mhm.
that's what code enforcement does.
Okay.
That's what our
Got
code
it.
compliance officer Neil
Okay.
does. I think I would just really caution if we wanted to pursue that, how do we make sure that the Historic Preservation Commission is not putting itself in an enforcement footing?
Right,
Because that would make historic resources very unpopular.
right.
Because you might get a bad actor, but you also might get someone who's on a fixed income and is living in the only place they can afford to do so.
Exactly.
This is the family home I inherited and I can't,
Right,
Mhm.
I
right.
need it. Yep. There is clear code section that talks about the exceptions for economic hardship related to historic preservation of homes. So there's the historic landmarks chapter of the code,
Okay,
so you can take a look at that.
okay,
If
thank
you
you.
need help finding it, let me know.
Mhm.
Okay, so I see, so I'm hearing shift everything down or up a year, I guess.
Yep.
Year 3, we can kind of change up the goals there and focus more on the identifying the buildings in need. And maybe starting to assist in grant applications in that year 3. Is that,
Could be, I mean, if,
Maybe.
if I would ask the commission, what is identify buildings in need? What does that mean to you? What's the
Mhm.
objective behind there? If it's to provide services to them. Like, I don't think we have to know exactly what that looks like right now.
I think we have to ask the owners.
Might be,
What do they,
right? Identify buildings in need and build relationships with
right,
owners.
yeah.
Right, but it,
Okay.
it could be architectural services, it could be
Sure.
facade restoration, it could be historic home renovation, it could
Yeah.
be. Something just dedicated to like historic windows.
Mhm.
You could probably slice it how we want.
Yeah,
Particularly if it's a pass-through grant approach.
You imagine if we did something where it was just open all the transom windows downtown. So many buildings have them closed
yeah,
off.
yeah,
Just go through, and open them all. Would look really interesting.
it sure would.
Okay, so it sounds like year 3, the goal is more identify the needs and connect with owners.
Yes.
So there we go. I'm sticking with the current years that are up there. Then 4, we're going for that historic downtown designation, not necessarily pursuing, but exploring.
Mhm.
I'll change that language. And then. What about year 5?
Would that be kind of a conditional one? So. depending
Yeah,
on outcomes-
rather than complete historic downtown designation, implement results
Yeah,
of year 4.
And start
meetings, open
developing,
houses, yeah,
and start developing the historic restoration program.
exactly.
Okay. It's a great plan, you guys. Okay. And then the following year, we'll apply for a grant to do whatever we've developed in year 5,
mhm.
which will be some sort of historic restoration program. So. So now we're back to a 5-year plan, which is great, so
Yeah.
5-year work plan. Now, this is centered around the CLG grants, but we can keep in mind that there are lots of other grants available. And if we come up with smaller things that need to be done that other grants can apply to, Clay and I will try and bring those to your attention. Those might be things we can kind of fit in there as needed. But the CLG grants give us a great framework for building out our work plan, I think. Robin, do you think that we'll have council support for this work?
Is there anything you think strikes you
Or
as like, I
anything
don't think
that
they're
you're
gonna.
like-
I think so. I mean. I think so. I think so. There's been a lot more talk lately of what do we want Newburgh to be designated? And I know we need a lot of work in downtown, so that's been coming up quite a bit, so.
So
I
what,
think we could.
to do one of the goals that you guys have brought up, which is defining the historic character of Newburgh. Some of that will be through the inventory. Some of that will be our analysis of the inventory in this group. So I think that that will have to be a consistent conversation for this for this commission.
Mhm.
Discussing the data we have, the information we have, the conversations we've had, and starting to decide what that is for the city and define what it is.
And this would be
Makes
for
sense.
tourism. I mean, that's been a huge, that's what, if we could center it around tourism, because that's been a big topic lately.
So there's a couple theories about doing this. So it
So-
can be for tourism for sure. Because when you've kind of just defined your characteristic and then you're trying to help restore your downtown back to that era and look. Because that's your unique character, right? That helps your town become one of those adorable
Yeah.
towns, right?
Yeah,
That does draw tourists. But the other aspect of it is the idea that when you are true to the character of your place and buildings look nice and things like that, it drives economic development
Yeah.
as well.
Yes.
Businesses want to have, so we kind of have a two-pronged approach here.
And it also helps the businesses determine who they are,
Yes.
right?
so from that approach, definitely, I think council would
Mhm.
be in support of it.
Okay. So I'm gonna write lean in on the tourism and economic development
Mhm.
approach.
I'd add
Or-
in just general livability too, from like
Yes.
from the public history perspective, like knowing and understanding your culture helps you as a citizen like feel a sense of belonging and like you can engage in community and that you're part of something. And I think that's huge in defining that characteristic and letting people know what they're stepping into and what they're contributing to is really important, just on a like personal social level.
Yeah.
And economic development, I think, is also great for livability. I mean, if businesses can thrive here, people will want to live here. So yes, it's tourism and it's whole community support.
My first introduction to history of Newburgh was the Providence Hospital. I don't remember why I was there, but there's this one wall, I don't know if it's still there or
Yeah.
not, but it talks about the history of the land that Providence is on and the kind of the history of Newburgh, and I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. Love that.
One thought I was just thinking about, we talked about it, oh gosh, about a year or so ago when we were reviewing council goals.
Mhm.
And one of the things, if you remember, I mentioned to you is that the goals were all, I thought quality goals, but they were all very concrete. There were no, what I would call aspirational goals.
Yeah,
And I would really encourage you to kind of look at, maybe encourage council to think about some aspirational goals. Because when I looked at those really concrete goals, it was hard to fit historic preservation into any of those
right,
goals.
right.
Whereas something more aspirational,
But I'm thinking moving to this next year with new council members, I would like, and this work is really ramped up.
Mhm.
And Newburgh, I think, we could actually make it be a concrete goal. I would propose that.
So if this commission has some goals to suggest to council.
Yes,
I think
yes,
that would be received. right?
yes,
Okay.
yes, I'm totally in support of it,
Yeah.
from an economic and tourist, and
So we make historic preservation of Newburgh's downtown to
Mhm.
support economic and
yeah,
tourism development,
yeah.
a council goal.
that is
Yeah.
gonna be a priority for me, yeah.
Okay,
I think that's brilliant. I love it.
I'm excited.
And I think
about
what I
that,
heard
yeah.
from Britta, who it looks like Britta popped off to
No.
on mute, but
Okay,
was
she's there.
some of the livability that I heard was also the qualitative. We're not just a collection of a bunch of buildings, but quality of those buildings and
Yeah.
ensuring that the ones that we have are of high quality and character, which super subjective. And so that's always hard to put into a bucket.
Yep.
But
And that's
making sure we do that.
kind of what I was talking about is making some aspirational components to your goals, like not everything is achievable in a year and measurable, something, when we talk about keeping Newburgh a small town, I think you'll get everybody will nod their head when you say, let's keep
but
Newburgh,
what does that mean?
the small town feel in Newburgh. But that's a very aspirational
Yeah.
goal. That I think a lot of folks are excited about and want to be a part of, and
Yeah.
I'd like to see council kind of strive for some of that.
Can I, and maybe this is for Robin, but
Go
when
ahead.
you say keeps the small town character and in a good way, what do you mean?
Yeah, see, that's, everybody's different. When I say keep Newburgh a small town, Newburgh is still a town where there's a handful of people who do a lot of the cultural, the volunteer work. You know, you've got, it's still a town where everybody knows who Brian Love is. And, you know, he's the go-to guy for a lot of the volunteer stuff. Whereas if you're in even a slightly, if you're in a Eugene is not a real big city, but if you're in a city like Eugene, there's little pockets of things that are going on. Whereas here, you know, everybody knows everybody. You know, that's an exaggeration. That's a broad statement. That's not true. But there's still that feeling like, boy, you go to the grocery store and folks stop and talk to you about whatever. And, you know, not every city has that, even of a comparable size.
How do you achieve, okay, you said it's aspirational, but how? Yeah, what does that look like as far as a goal? What would we do as far as policies?
What's measurable?
Yeah.
Yeah, measurable, what does
Well,
that look like?
I guess when I say that, keeping a part of the goal that we understand is probably more than we can achieve this year. You know, keeping a small town feel, keeping Newburgh, yeah, see, I'm stumbling.
Preserving, are you?
Yeah.
You're talking about preserving the downtown area, the historical part?
I'm talking about preserving the culture of Newburgh,
The
our culture,
connections.
the connection, the
Yeah,
cultural
yeah,
connections,
yeah,
the social
yeah,
connections.
Yeah.
And to do that, to facilitate that, you need places where people can connect.
Yeah,
And it can't be all strip malls, right? It had, you know, there's a sense of
The
place.
commons, the green, yeah.
Exactly, or like the cultural center and the library, that whole little space up there. That's where we do things, right? We have the tree lighting, we have things
Yeah,
that happen.
maybe there's a good example of what I would think of as an aspirational goal. You know, in my personal opinion, I think Newburgh is ready for more what they refer to as third spaces. You know, not home and not work.
Right,
And, you know, places like Lyrics where you go and you get a cup of coffee and you sit down with your friends
Right.
and you talk. And Chapters and, you know,
Social goods. work to build up.
social goods, you know, those third places. You know, social goods is a little bit limited in their
Yeah.
hours, so, you know, and unfortunately, like.
You're talking about hangout
Like,
places.
A hangout
Place
place
to
where,
hang out, just be together.
Yeah.
when you go into Chapters, you're probably gonna see somebody, you know,
Yeah.
or have a chance to sit down and talk. When you
This-
go to Lyrics,
Comes down to like making sure that our parks have plenty of seating, so the parents are gathering and sitting around together chatting.
Yeah,
Or that, you know, people have spaces to be.
yeah.
and so
Yeah.
to me, an aspirational goal would be, you know, Newburgh seeks to promote, additional
Spaces for
third
connection.
spaces.
Yeah.
You know, to provide for
opportunity for
cultural,
connection.
social interaction between our citizens.
And you're feeling like that's missing.
I'm feeling like it's a, I don't know, I'm not a business person. It's always easy to spend other people's money. But I'm feeling like it's a business opportunity that's there. There's a desire, you know, I think Lay OK kind of gets at it a little bit, you know, but their hours are limited and there's not a lot of seating. Places where you could just go and meet your friends
Yeah.
and then walk next door and buy something at the shoe store, or buy something at the boutique. But where you know, that, to me, that's getting at what I mean when I say keeping a small town feel.
So you're talking about a lot of placemaking.
Yeah,
So placemaking is this concept of building those spaces for gathering, of curating kind of your area, so you've got a good mixture of your businesses, and you've got gathering spaces, and you've got walkability, and you're creating a place that people want to be and spend time together.
And sometimes that can be event-based and facilitated. Sometimes it can be a structure, sometimes it can be an open space. As someone who's only been in town for a short period of time, can tell you that places like the forecourt behind the cultural center is probably just as important as the cultural center
Mhm.
itself.
Yep.
Because it hosts a number of events, even though it's just a big open area. But it could probably be even further defined or made to be better compatible, kind of leading into the downtown and some of our urban core.
So if you think about Poisdorf and their
Mhm.
Winzerfest, right?
Mhm.
They have spaces created in order to have this giant festival that they have every year for wine.
Mhm.
So there's a need for those types of spaces. That's
Mhm.
part of the placemaking of
Mhm.
creating culture.
We
It's
talked about this with the
Tricky.
fashion festival.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah.
Yeah, and
Permanent
the Old
stages.
Fashioned Festival, if, you know, Rennie Field's under renovation and it's already kind of split between Memorial Park and Rennie Field. There's not a whole lot of places big enough to host something like that. It's hard.
Whether the festival ever were to use it or not, another third space, another park space that is fallow right now, but is ripe for development, for use, is the space underneath and adjacent to the bypass. Right now, it's just kind of a slightly weedy,
By the river,
Almost.
or
not quite as far as the river, directly underneath,
like on River Street is what you're
on,
thinking? or
in between
close to it?
River and College,
Yeah.
underneath and adjacent to the bypass, is a
Ah.
large swath of open land that will never be developed. That is underneath of cover for rain and
Would-
sun.
You think about the Portland Saturday Market, have you ever gone to that?
Yep.
It's under a lot of those types of places. So it's just all sorts of ideas.
And so right now it's a place where, okay, a couple people who live in the apartments nearby take their dogs there to exercise. But there's a host of things that could happen there, you know, I'm kind of eyeing it
interesting.
with the development of Rennie Field. It's really gonna impact the Old Fashioned Festival, you know, the biggest impact being we won't be able to do fireworks anymore. So,
We're sure about that?
yeah, we talked with our vendor, we can't launch fireworks down there where there's turf field. So,
Drones.
so we need to figure out what impact that's
Which is
gonna have on
big.
the festival.
Really? No fireworks?
They
You
can't
do it on a
launch
turf
next,
field.
they could do ground displays,
That's
they-
gonna be,
but they can't launch any fireworks up into the air adjacent to that, once that turf field goes in.
How much space do they need?
I
we'd
don't know
have
how
to-
far they need to be, you
I was
know,
actually thinking of road shutdowns.
Yeah, oh yeah, road shutdowns, so that could be
So they
interesting.
just launch them from the road.
they need more space.
I
Yeah.
feel like that's such a great example of like what the community feel is like. Having fireworks at the Old Fashioned Festival is like a hallmark of Newburgh community and something that we all do. And
So,
like
It's an issue I'm really personally struggling with because
Cause you're involved with the. community.
because I'm the president of the festival.
yeah.
PRD is putting in the turf field. We can't launch fireworks. Okay. You know, we did in 2021, we launched fireworks at the site of the old mill.
yeah,
Okay, fireworks cost, we spent $22,000 on fireworks last year. If we pay $22,000 to put fireworks down there, folks are gonna get it, folks who are gonna come down to the fireworks, they're gonna get in their car at their house. And they're gonna drive to the fireworks, watch the fireworks and then leave and never come to the festival.
oh,
And so it's a
Oh.
lot of money. You know, we're still internally trying to figure out how to address this as a festival. This is just me, I'm not speaking for the festival, I'm just one person, but. The thought of spending $22,000 to set up essentially a competing event that's gonna
Mhm.
draw visitors away from my festival. And my vendors who paid to be there and all the revenue generating portion,
True.
because the fireworks don't generate any revenue.
how, do you know how many people are at the festival that walk over, or, cause I know I go specifically to, I'm already at the festival.
But if you're at the fireworks, do you wander over and get food or? do you-
Not usually.
think a lot of people
Many
do.
people do.
You
You know,
think so?
Oh,
Okay.
it would be a
Okay.
massive hit to,
Okay.
it would be a big
Vendors.
reduction in business for our
Right.
vendors
Yeah.
and make us
okay.
less appealing to vendors. It would be a loss of business for the carnival,
Okay.
which is also a revenue source for us. Yeah, it's a
So
big
one,
challenge.
one thing I'm hearing from this is that it might be another goal of this group to start identifying those, sacred cow traditions of the
Mm.
town. What are things that if we lost this, we know that the character of Newburgh's been broken in some way. So things that this is Newburgh, this is so important. So I think that identifying those traditions might be as important as identifying the places.
Is this like, you'd almost want to develop like a cultural inventory, not just a historic structures
yeah.
inventory. It's a heritage inventory, which I
Yeah.
feel like I've talked about these sort of programs in other places, but that might be, I mean, one of our goals from our last session was like looking at prioritizing both built histories and human histories. This
Yep.
is the core of human histories that we're talking about right now.
Absolutely. Another one that comes to mind is it's newer, but it's still well established, is the Camellia Festival.
Yep,
I remember going to the first Camellia Festival, which was in this room.
and when it
And-
didn't happen last year, it threw a lot of people off.
And, it was a temporary thing last year. It wasn't
Yeah,
a big,
100%.
but yeah, a lot of folks were like, why are they canceling? Why that?
And a lot of people would also say the George Fox Christmas concerts,
Yeah,
there's
yes.
things that are really, so that, I would say that starting to build that inventory might be just as valuable.
Yeah.
Because that gives council an idea of the things that people in this town value so much that we want to make sure that they're protected in some way. In addition, there are statewide awards for long-running traditions. Parades,
It's on the back of
yeah.
my list.
so,
Oregon cultural traditions.
Yep.
You can be designated as a official Oregon cultural tradition.
Wow.
And applying for the festival to be, there's no money, it's just an honorary.
it's just a recognition.
But that's definitely something that's on my list to do for the festival.
Mhm. But that right there gets the city's name out there.
Yeah.
It's a great recognition piece. So-
I think those might be the Oregon Heritage Excellence Awards.
Yes.
Does that sound right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Wow.
And those are the Oregon Heritage Excellence Awards and the Main Street Excellence Awards are the ones that I was speaking of earlier. Great.
You guys
So
are awesome. This is very exciting.
this is very exciting. I
Yes.
like this.
Very exciting.
So it sounds like next year.
Bob, I
So
feel for
look,
you.
we've got all sorts of fun stuff. I know, this
I
fireworks
really
thing.
feel
That's all right. Luckily, he just retired, so he's got so much spare time. He doesn't.
yeah,
Oh,
what the next step is, I don't know, I can't really, I don't want to, and I can't really afford to be like fully retired for the rest of my life. As soon as I said I was retired, my oldest daughter, she's worked as a server at Friendsview for the last year,
Mhm.
and she's like, oh, Dad, you gotta come work in the dish pit at Friendsview.
My daughter works there at Friendsview doing that stuff. She just got a job there.
Right on. Well, so I've been washing dishes
That's a
3
great
days a week for the past month.
This is like Karen has joined us. I've just sent her an
Oh,
invite to
great.
promote to panelists. Sorry, Karen, I don't know how long you've been here, but I just noticed. So you're welcome to join as a panelist if you want to have a chance to speak with us.
But so the good news is that CPRD doesn't plan on doing any construction until fall of 2025. So this summer is business as usual.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
But
Okay.
after fall of 2025. That's
what
when,
the plan is.
so basically summer of 26,
oh,
we won't be able to do fireworks the way we've done them.
unless you guys come up with alternative.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
It's not off the table, I mean, shoot, yeah.
We'll need to do something different in summer of 26.
Mhm.
What that will look like is TBD.
And going forward, yeah, so you can't, it won't ever look the same. what you're saying because of the
No.
turf.
Yeah.
Do you know how long we've been doing the fireworks from that location?
That's a good question. You know, the festival has changed a lot over
Yeah.
120 some years. Yeah.
It's been around.
You know, it used to be dispersed around town. A lot of the activity was down at Hoover Park. 30, it's more than 30. 30, 40 years it's been centralized at Memorial Park,
Yeah.
Rennie Field.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know,
Hmm.
right now, we'll need to adapt, but our logistics infrastructure is all based around Memorial Park, Rennie Field, having
Yeah.
all the activities walkable, tight knit with
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah, it's worked really well that
Yeah.
way.
You know, and our revenue is sponsorships. But also the vendor booth fees is a big portion, about 20% of our revenue. If they're not getting the same amount of business because there aren't as many folks coming, we don't get as many vendors, that goes down.
That was an issue with the carnival in the years past.
Well,
correct? You couldn't get
The only
them.
year we had an issue with the carnival was 2022,
Yeah.
there was a labor shortage.
Okay,
And they couldn't get enough workers,
Oh.
and so they were only able to do the biggest festival, they only were able to do the Rose Festival.
Okay. Okay.
And so that was just a temporary labor shortage.
okay,
But the carnival, we get a portion of the carnival revenue, that's also a significant portion. Another almost 20% of our revenues from the carnival, so if the attendance at the carnival drops, our revenue drops.
yeah,
And, you know, carnivals are not an easy business. If we're not an attractive place for a carnival, they're not gonna be able to come back.
how were the numbers, can you say last year? I mean, you have to give.
Oh,
detail, but
no,
good. People are still
Oh,
high
yeah, no,
turnout.
we had a great. It was, the 2024 was an amazing festival.
Higher than other years.
One of the
Um,
festivals here, yeah.
You know, post-COVID, it was,
Yeah. that's the Georgia
I'd have to look at our numbers to know, but,
But they were. that's when
yeah,
they
we were basically
So
back as
great.
strong as we've ever been.
So I just,
Is that
the historian in me had to bring up a historic
Yes.
festival photo. This is from the George Fox Archives, but it is, this building here is the Pacific College building that used to be basically where the electrical plant across the street from here is.
Mhm.
And the Minthorn building, which was the original academy building. This building's still standing on the George Fox campus. It was
Mhm.
moved across town. But they have a big festival right out here. Now, some of these small houses here, I believe might still be right over here. So I've been trying to figure that out for years, but I thought you would all enjoy seeing the hot air
Oh,
balloon
yeah.
and the big festival.
Yeah,
We've been having a festival, the Old Fashioned Festival. It always hasn't always had that name. It's been some sort of festival for many, many years. But I love this photo. I mean, it just shows how long we've been.
This
doing
looks ancient. This looks like it's.
Well, let's see, this building was 1893,
Yeah.
2 or 3. No, earlier, 91, because it moved right after that. So this is 1891. So sometime shortly around 1891, 1892, because the entire campus moved by 1893 and then Newburgh Friends Church was built. So this is,
Yeah.
I mean, it's old.
Wow.
These are really beautiful old traditions. I really loved it. I mean, you guys, this is really productive and cool goal setting here.
Yeah.
And practical. I think these are
Mhm.
very
Yeah.
doable.
Mhm. We get our butts in gear on the historic resource inventory.
Yeah, we'll have to get that going, but I
Mhm.
think we can get that pulled together pretty easily.
I think we can.
Then you and I
So
just need to.
You and I can talk.
Yep.
And we will talk to you
Sure, yes.
to figure out, I don't know if you've had to do it. Does the city council very often do basically a memo like, hey, I'm introducing something? Is that
No.
been-
This is
Will
the new thing
usually-
we've just brought back up.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw my email recently, that if you have, and if counselors have items for the agenda, we're trying to gather those, so you can bring an agenda item to the agenda. Bill approves the agenda, but any counselor can add an item.
Yeah.
So we're trying to, and Bill asked me to email you all about that, so. So you'll get weekly emails from me reminding you that if you have anything to add, please let me know.
So I can go to you, but he still has to approve
You can
it.
go to me, he approves the agenda as a whole. Now, if he didn't approve it, you could still bring it up at the beginning of a meeting and say, I have
New
an
business.
item to add, and everyone could vote on it, whether or not it was added to the meeting.
Okay, so it has to be done in a meeting. I mean,
Well,
Will
it
has,
doesn't have, you can submit something outside of a meeting too. and say,
Will
"I'd like to bring
has, you know, emailed, line copied all of us to get
Yeah.
our opinion on things. That's where it seems like.
Yeah, so if you have something that you'd like to see on the agenda, and
Okay,
you let me know.
Yeah.
We'll ask Bill if he's okay with that being added to the agenda. If he's okay, we'll just add it.
yeah,
If he's not, and you still want it on the agenda as a counselor, just as a procedure thing here. Because you know, checks and balances, right?
okay,
So the check to Bill's authority over the agenda is that you can bring it up for a vote at the beginning of any meeting and say, I'd like to add an item to the agenda.
sure,
And then the whole council would vote on whether or not they would allow it to be.
okay,
So just so you know.
okay, so I can get it on there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but if you let me know ahead of time, we can probably facilitate it behind the scenes before,
Okay.
so.
We've talked a lot, Bill and I
Oh,
talked
I
a
think-
lot about downtown, so.
Yeah.
If I can just,
Not too hard to do.
No, and it's fairly normal practice. I mean, you guys always have a standing updates from counselors.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can always bring it up then too.
Okay.
And also, one thing we've added in there in the updates from counselor section is a specific bullet point for updates about committees and commissions.
oh,
So
he
you
does
can
want
also
that.
do that too. He's asked for that already. So you could do this as part of that.
Okay, true.
And I know that, when Molly Olson was a counselor, and she was the liaison to planning
Yeah.
commission, she would sometimes take some of the updates that we had, if she felt like something was good for the council to know about, that they were dealing with. We would try and do those, so particularly if there's work plan things, even if you're not asking them to do anything.
Yeah.
You just think they might wanna know
Okay,
that it's going on, that way when something does finally pop up, they're like, oh, this isn't a complete surprise. So for example, she had, I think, started mentioning that there started to be conversations about vacation rentals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then she left,
okay,
so she
Yeah.
couldn't say, no, this is, they've been talking about this, has been an issue for a while. But that's the
Sure.
sort of thing that can make it so that it's not quite such a left field when something finally shows up at council.
If you want to add something to the agenda, request something like that, it doesn't mean that it has to be you presenting it too. So you could always ask
Mhm.
Clay and I to come as staff and present on that item for you.
Oh.
So, just so you know.
okay, that could be very
Yeah,
Yes, so
helpful.
we can.
Because what I'm
definitely help
picturing
with
for
this,
your ask,
or
if you
invite
want
these
is a
guys.
Okay.
one page memo saying, we've been discussing the work plan,
Yeah, we can.
we'd
easily
like,
do
I'd
that.
like to have city council consider this and make a motion to support or not,
Yeah,
And then you
pursuing
could
a
talk-
grant for a historic resources inventory update.
Okay, and then you would talk on it, or?
we can. if you like us to.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, it's your show,
So,
but that
Yeah.
means you can delegate it, which
Yeah.
is what counselors often do.
Which,
Yeah,
it could be
I like
us, or
that.
you could invite the commission members to come and speak on it, Bob as the chair.
Yeah,
So-
that's the most common. If you only need one, you usually grab the chair.
Chairperson.
If for some reason you need the entire team, you could
Chair
ask.
and
I've never
staff
actually
members.
seen that, but usually you end up grabbing the chair. That typically follows a motion where everyone's kind of collectively said, yes, we're doing this and we're gonna send the chair,
Yeah.
or whatever. So,
Okay, sounds like a
Told you
plan.
I'm working on some council hacks for all of you guys. So It's coming. I just finished a
Council
400
hacks.
page training manual that's
influence
coming
your
your way.
colleagues.
All right,
Well, so we've had a great conversation. So
Mhm.
with that, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Very
Thank
good.
you.